My name is Tom Langley, and I used to think the worst thing about marriage was having to pretend I enjoyed my wife's cooking. Turns out, I was spectacularly wrong about that. But we'll get to the spectacular part later. I'm 42, work as an IT project manager for a mid-sized consulting firm in suburban Chicago, and until 3 months ago, I thought I had a pretty decent life. My marriage to Saddie was like a Windows update, promised improvement, delivered occasional blue screens, but mostly just kept running in the background without much excitement. Saddie worked as an HR manager at Meridian Financial, one of those glass tower companies downtown where everyone wears expensive suits and talks about synergy without irony. She's 41, blonde, charming, in that professional way that makes people trust her with their secrets. Maybe that should have been my first warning sign. We'd been married 15 years, no kids by choice. Well, her choice, but I'd gone along with it. We're building our careers, she'd say. Kids can wait. 15 years later, we were still waiting, and I was starting to wonder if we were waiting for something that was never going to happen. The first sign something was wrong came about 3 months ago. Saddie started working late more often, coming home with stories about difficult projects and demanding clients. She'd always been dedicated to her job, but this was different. She'd arrive home at 9 or 10 at night, exhausted, claiming she'd grabbed dinner at the office. Another late night, I'd ask, looking up from my laptop where I was usually debugging code or watching Netflix. You know how it is, she'd reply, not quite meeting my eyes. Jennifer's been pushing everyone hard this quarter. The Peterson account is a nightmare. Jennifer was her boss, a woman I'd met exactly twice in 15 years of marriage. Saddie always described her as demanding but fair, which in HR speak probably meant complete tyrant with a law degree. Then came the girls' nights. Saddie had always been social, but suddenly she was going out every Friday with her friend Julie and the gang from work. She'd come home tipsy, smelling like expensive perfume that wasn't hers, talking about how much fun they'd had at whatever trendy bar was the flavor of the month. You should come sometime, she'd say, but her tone suggested she'd rather I didn't. My brother Pete was the first one to voice what I was trying not to think. Pete's a plumber, 5 years younger than me, divorced twice, and has the kind of street smarts that come from learning life's lessons the hard way. She's acting weird, man, he said one Saturday while we were watching the game at Murphy's Tavern. Saddie's always been friendly, but she used to actually talk to you when I was around. Last time I saw her, she barely looked up from her phone. She's just stressed about work, I said, taking a long pull from my beer. You know how corporate jobs are. Pete gave me the look he'd perfected in high school when I was being particularly dense. Tom, I've been married twice. I know what stressed about work looks like, and I know what getting some on the side looks like. This ain't stress. I wanted to argue with him, but the truth was, I'd been having the same thoughts. Saddie had become distant, distracted. Our conversations had devolved into logistics, who was picking up groceries when the cable bill was due, whether we needed to call the lawn service. We hadn't had intimacy in 2 months, and when I'd tried to initiate, she'd claimed she was too tired or had a headache or needed to get up early for work. But the real wake-up call came when I decided to do a little detective work. I'm not proud of it, but desperation makes you do stupid things. I started paying attention to the details Saddie thought I wouldn't notice, like the receipt I found in her purse for the Riverside Inn, a boutique hotel about 20 minutes from our house. The receipt was for dinner for 2 and a bottle of wine that cost more than our monthly cable bill. The name on the receipt was Mr. and Mrs. Kennedy. Our last name is Langley. Or the text message I glimpsed on her phone while she was in the shower. It was from someone named David. Can't wait to see you Thursday. Same place? David. I knew that name. Saddie had mentioned him before. He was a newer employee in her department, some hotshot they'd hired from a competitor. According to Saddie, he was really smart and super dedicated. She'd mentioned him enough times that I'd started to notice. Thursday came, and I decided to test a theory. I called Saddie around lunchtime and suggested we go to dinner at that Italian place she liked. Oh, honey, I'd love to, but I'm swamped here, she said, and I could hear the lie in her voice. Rain's supposed to be terrible tonight anyway, and Jennifer scheduled this last-minute meeting about the Morrison project. I'll probably be here until 9 or 10. No problem, I said. Maybe this weekend. Definitely. Love you. Love you too. But I didn't go home after work that Thursday. Instead, I drove around, killing time, waiting to see if my suspicions were justified. The rain started around 6. Not just rain, but a proper Midwestern downpour that turned the streets into rivers and made driving a white-knuckle experience. By 7:30, I was hydroplaning down Route 53, my windshield wipers fighting a losing battle against the storm. My hands were cramped from gripping the steering wheel, and I was starting to think this whole surveillance mission was a terrible idea. That's when I saw the sign for Café Luna, a little place I'd driven past 100 times but never visited. The parking lot was half full, warm light glowing through rain-streaked windows. It looked like exactly the kind of cozy spot where you'd wait out a storm, or where you'd meet someone you weren't supposed to be meeting. I pulled into the parking lot, turned off the engine, and sat there for a moment, listening to the rain hammer against the roof of my car. Part of me wanted to just drive home, pretend I'd never found that receipt or seen that text message. Ignorance, after all, was supposed to be bliss. But the other part of me, the part that had been eating at me for 3 months, needed to know the truth. I grabbed my jacket and made a run for the cafe entrance, getting soaked in the 10 seconds it took to cross the parking lot. Café Luna was exactly the kind of place Saddie would choose for an affair. Dim lighting, intimate booths, the kind of atmosphere that suggested romance rather than betrayal. The hostess, a college-age girl with purple hair and a nose ring, looked up as I dripped water onto the welcome mat. "Just one?" she asked. "Yeah, just me," I said, shaking rain from my jacket. "Could I get a table where I can see the whole place?" She led me to a small table near the window, handed me a menu, and disappeared. I ordered coffee from a server who looked like she'd rather be anywhere else, then settled in to scan the room. At first, I didn't see them. The cafe was busier than I'd expected for a Thursday night in a storm, couples sharing desserts, a few people working on laptops, an elderly man reading a newspaper in the corner. Normal people living normal lives, none of them about to have their world imploded. Then I saw the booth in the far corner, partially hidden by a decorative screen. Saddie was there, all right. But she wasn't sitting across from David Kennedy. She was sitting on his lap. Her arms were around his neck, one hand playing with his hair. He had his hands on her waist, and they were laughing about something, completely absorbed in each other. She was wearing the blue dress I'd bought her for her birthday last year, the one she said made her feel beautiful. I sat there for what felt like an hour, but was probably only 30 seconds, watching my wife of 15 years nuzzle the neck of a man who wasn't me. My coffee arrived, and I thanked the server without taking my eyes off the corner booth. David Kennedy looked exactly like the kind of guy Saddie would cheat with. Mid-30s, athletic build, the kind of confident smile that suggested he'd never been told no about anything that mattered. He was wearing an expensive suit and a watch that probably cost more than my car payment. They were so focused on each other that they hadn't noticed me. Saddie said something that made David laugh, and he pulled her closer. She kissed his cheek, then whispered something in his ear that made him grin. That's when I decided I'd seen enough. I pulled out my phone, opened the camera app, and stood up. The movement caught Saddie's attention, and she turned toward me, still smiling from whatever joke they'd been sharing. The smile died when she saw me. I've never seen anyone's face change so quickly. Saddie went from radiant to terrified in the space of a heartbeat, her skin draining of color like someone had pulled a plug. She scrambled off David's lap so fast she nearly fell, catching herself on the edge of the table. David, still clueless, looked concerned. "What's wrong, honey?" he asked, reaching for her hand. But before he could turn around to see what had spooked her, I raised my phone and took a picture. The camera flash lit up their corner of the cafe like a spotlight. "What the hell are you doing?" Saddie whispered, but her voice carried in the sudden quiet that had fallen over our section of the restaurant. "Documenting your affair," I said, loud enough for nearby tables to hear. I took another picture for good measure. David finally turned around, and I got my first good look at the man who'd been sleeping with my wife. Up close, he was younger than I'd expected, with the kind of perfectly styled hair that required expensive products and regular maintenance. His face went through the same color-draining process Saddie's had when he realized who I was. "You're her husband," he said. It wasn't a question. "Tom Langley," I said, extending my hand like we were meeting at a business conference. "And you must be David Kennedy, the super dedicated coworker my wife's been telling me so much about." David didn't take my hand. Instead, he stood up, probably thinking he could intimidate me with his height advantage. He had about 3 inches on me, but I'd been angry for 3 months, and anger is a hell of a motivator. "Look, this isn't what it looks like," David said. "Really?" I said, holding up my phone to show him the photos. "Because it looks like my wife was sitting on your lap in a romantic cafe during a thunderstorm while I thought she was working late. What does it look like to you?" Saddie found her voice. "Tom, please, can we talk about this at home?" "We can talk about it right here," I said, "in front of your boyfriend and everyone else who's pretending not to stare at us." And people were staring. The elderly man had lowered his newspaper. The couple at the next table had stopped eating. Even the purple-haired hostess was watching from across the room. "I'm calling your boss," I announced, scrolling through my contacts. "No," Saddie said, lunging for my phone. "Please don't do that." But I'd already found Jennifer's number. Saddie had made me program it into my phone years ago, in case of emergency. I guess this qualified. The phone rang twice before a crisp voice answered. Jennifer Morrison. Hi, Jennifer. This is Tom Langley, Saddie's husband. I'm calling about employee conduct. Tom? Is Saddie all right? It's rather late for... Saddie's fine. She's sitting right here with her coworker, David Kennedy. I'm sending you some photos that I think violate your company's relationship policy. I could hear Jennifer's sharp intake of breath as I sent the pictures. Tom, I'm going to need to verify these images and... Take your time, I said. They're not going anywhere. I heard the soft ping of Jennifer receiving the photos, then a longer pause. When she spoke again, her voice had gone from concerned to coldly professional. I see. Thank you for bringing this to my attention. This will need to be addressed immediately. I figured it would. Have a good evening, Jennifer. I hung up and looked at Saddie, who had gone from pale to green. Congratulations. You just cost yourself your job. You bastard, David said, finally finding his courage. You can't just what? Expose your affair? Document your violation of company policy? Protect my own interests? I turned to face him fully. David, right now you're thinking about trying to leave. I wouldn't recommend it. You can't keep me here. Watch me. I stepped between him and the exit. See, I've got a few more calls to make, and I think you should stick around for them. I scrolled through my contacts again and found Linda Kennedy's number. Saddie had insisted we exchange contact information with David's wife at the company Christmas party last year. In case of emergency, she'd said. Another emergency, I guess. Who are you calling now? David asked, but I could see in his eyes that he already knew. Linda answered on the first ring. Hello? Hi, Linda. This is Tom Langley, Saddie's husband. We met at the Meridian Christmas party. Oh, hi, Tom. Is everything okay? I'm at Café Luna on Route 53, and I thought you should know that your husband is here with my wife. I'm sending you some photos. The line went quiet except for the sound of Linda's breathing. When she spoke again, her voice was deadly calm. Send them. I sent the photos and waited. It didn't take long. That bastard, Linda said, and I could hear her moving around, probably grabbing her keys. Is he still there? He's right here if you want to talk to him. I held the phone out to David, who was now sweating despite the cafe's air conditioning. Your wife wants to talk to you. David's hands shook as he took the phone. Linda, I can explain. Whatever Linda said made David hold the phone away from his ear. Even from 3 feet away, I could hear her screaming. After about 30 seconds of verbal assault, the line went dead. David handed me back my phone without making eye contact. Well, I said, looking around the cafe, which had gone completely silent except for the rain still pounding against the windows. I think that covers the immediate family. Saddie, David, it's been educational. I dropped a 20 on my table to cover the coffee I hadn't touched and headed for the door. Tom, wait, Saddie called after me. Please, we need to talk about this. I turned back to look at her one last time. She was still beautiful, even with mascara starting to run down her cheeks. Even after what I'd just witnessed, part of me wanted to forgive her, to find a way to make this work. But that part was getting smaller by the second. You're right, I said. We do need to talk. But not here, and not tonight. Tonight, I'm going home to change the locks. You might want to find somewhere else to sleep. I walked out into the storm, leaving Saddie and David to face the stares of an entire cafe full of strangers. The rain hit me like a cold slap, but I was smiling as I got into my car. The storm was just beginning. I drove home through the rain with a strange sense of calm. For 3 months, I'd been living with suspicion eating at me like acid. Now I knew the truth, and the truth, as much as it hurt, was better than the uncertainty. The first thing I did when I got home was call a 24-hour locksmith. The second thing I did was pour myself 3 fingers of bourbon. The third thing I did was start gathering Saddie's belongings. I wasn't vindictive about it. I just wanted her stuff out of my space. I filled garbage bags with her clothes, toiletries, shoes, and the collection of romance novels she kept on her nightstand. By the time the locksmith arrived at 11 p.m., I had everything neatly bagged and waiting by the front door. Divorce? The locksmith asked as he worked on the deadbolt. Affair? I said. Ah. He nodded knowingly. Cash or credit? Saddie showed up at 12:30, just as I was finishing my 4th bourbon. I heard her key in the lock, then the confused rattling when it wouldn't turn. She knocked, then pounded, then started yelling. Tom, open this door. We need to talk. I opened the door, but kept the chain latch engaged. Your stuff's on the porch. You can pick it up in the morning. You can't lock me out of my own house? Actually, I can. The house is in my name, remember? You insisted on that for tax purposes. That had been Saddie's idea 3 years ago when we'd refinanced. She'd convinced me that having the mortgage solely in my name would be better for our credit scores. At the time, I'd thought she was being financially savvy. Now I realized she'd been protecting her assets. Tom, please, let me in. It's raining, and we need to discuss this like adults. Adults don't cheat on their spouses, I said. Adults don't lie about working late while they're sitting on other men's laps. I can explain. I'm sure you can. You've always been good at explaining things. But I'm not interested in explanations tonight. I'm calling the police if you're not gone in 5 minutes. She stood there for another 3 minutes, alternating between pleading and threatening, but eventually she gave up. I watched from the window as she loaded her bags into her car and drove away, probably to Juliet's house or a hotel or maybe David's place. I didn't care where she went. The next morning, I called in sick to work and drove to the office of Rita Castellanos, the best divorce attorney in the county. Pete had recommended her after his second divorce, and she'd gotten him a settlement that let him keep his house and his truck. Rita was a small, fierce woman in her 50s who looked like she could tear apart a hostile witness with her bare hands. She listened to my story without interruption, occasionally taking notes on a legal pad. "You have photos?" she asked when I finished. I showed her the pictures from the café. She studied them with the clinical detachment of someone who'd seen every possible variation of human betrayal. "These are good," she said. "Clear, unambiguous, time-stamped. Illinois is a no-fault state, but adultery can still affect asset division and spousal support. With evidence this clear, we can push for a favorable settlement." "I want her to get as little as possible," I said. "That's understandable. But let's be strategic. Your wife worked in HR. She knows employment law, which means she probably has some idea about divorce law too. She's going to lawyer up fast, and she's going to try to claim that the affair was a symptom of marriage problems, not the cause." "What does that mean?" "It means she's going to paint you as an inattentive husband who drove her into another man's arms. She'll claim emotional abandonment, lack of intimacy, maybe even verbal abuse if she's desperate enough." The thought of Saddie playing the victim made my jaw clench. "Can she do that?" "She can try, but we have evidence of her deception, and we have witnesses to her behavior. The cafe staff saw what happened. Her boss knows about the policy violation. This David Kennedy character's wife is probably furious enough to testify if we need her to. Rita was right about Saddie lawyering up." By Friday afternoon, I'd received a call from Saddie's attorney, a man named Charles Hoffman, who specialized in protecting women's rights in divorce proceedings. He wanted to schedule a mediation session to discuss an amicable resolution. I told him to talk to Rita. The real fun started on Monday when Saddie and David didn't show up for work. According to Pete, who'd heard it from his girlfriend who worked in the building next to Meridian Financial, both of them had been fired for violating the company's relationship policy. The policy, it turned out, prohibited romantic relationships between supervisors and subordinates. Saddie, as an HR manager, was technically David's supervisor. Their affair wasn't just adultery, it was a fireable offense that could expose the company to intimate harassment lawsuits. Jennifer Morrison, Saddie's former boss, had acted swiftly and decisively. Both Saddie and David were terminated effective immediately, their access to company systems revoked, their personal belongings boxed up and mailed to them. The news spread through their social circle like wildfire. Saddie's friend Julie called me on Tuesday, ostensibly to check on how I was doing, but really to fish for details. "I just can't believe Saddie would do something like this," Julie said. "She always seemed so devoted to you." "Apparently not as devoted as she seemed," I said. "Is there any chance this is all a misunderstanding? Maybe they were just friends and—" "Julie, I saw her sitting on his lap. I have photos. There's no misunderstanding here." Julie's tone shifted slightly. "You know, Tom, marriage is complicated. Sometimes people make mistakes when they're not getting what they need at home." And there it was, the first hint that Saddie's narrative was already spreading through our friend group. According to this version of events, I was the neglectful husband who'd driven my wife into another man's arms. "What exactly are you suggesting, Julie?" "I'm just saying that Saddie's been unhappy for a while. She's mentioned that you two haven't been connecting lately, that you've been distant, and—" "Stop right there," I said. "Saddie was cheating on me. She was lying to me for months, maybe longer. If she was unhappy, she should have talked to me about it, not started screwing her coworker. There's no need to be crude. There's no need to blame me for my wife's affair, but here we are." I hung up on Julie and immediately called Pete. "They're already spinning it," I told him. "Saddie's got her friends convinced that this is somehow my fault." "Of course she does," Pete said. "Cheaters always blame the other person. It's easier than taking responsibility." Julie practically accused me of driving Saddie to cheat. Julie's always been a bad wife, Pete said. Remember when she tried to set you up with her cousin while you and Saddie were engaged? She's probably jealous that Saddie had the balls to actually cheat. That was an uncomfortable thought, but not an implausible one. Julie had been divorced twice and seemed to take a perverse pleasure in other people's relationship problems. Over the next few days, I started to see how the battle lines were being drawn. Saddie's core group of friends, Julie, Karen from her book club, and a few women from her yoga class, were rallying around her, spreading the story that I was a cold, inattentive husband who'd neglected his wife until she'd been forced to seek comfort elsewhere. But not everyone was buying it. Linda Kennedy, David's wife, had filed for divorce and was telling anyone who'd listen that David was a lying, cheating bastard. Some of Saddie's work friends, particularly the ones who'd had to deal with David's arrogance, were less sympathetic to the poor Saddie narrative. The real surprise came from Karen, Saddie's book club friend, who called me on Thursday evening. "Tom, I wanted to apologize," she said. "Julie told us her version of what happened, but I've been thinking about it, and it doesn't add up." "What do you mean?" "Saddie's been talking about David for months. At first we thought she just had a work crush, you know? But looking back, the way she talked about him, the way she lit up when she mentioned him, this wasn't a recent thing." "How long do you think it's been going on?" "I don't know for sure, but remember the book club Christmas party? Saddie spent the whole night texting someone. When I asked who it was, she said it was work stuff, but she was smiling like a teenager with a crush. The Christmas party had been 4 months ago. If Karen was right, Saddie's affair had been going on a lot longer than I'd suspected. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked. "Because Julie's trying to make you the villain, and that's not fair. Saddie made her choice. She could have talked to you, could have suggested counseling, could have asked for a divorce if she was that unhappy. Instead, she chose to sneak around and lie. That's on her, not you." Karen's call was a reminder that not everyone was going to side with Saddie, but it was also a reminder that this divorce was going to be a war fought on multiple fronts: legal, financial, and social. Saddie wanted to paint herself as the victim of a neglectful marriage. I had other plans. I called Rita and scheduled another meeting. It was time to go on the offensive. Rita's office felt like a war room when I arrived Friday morning. She had Saddie's financial records spread across her conference table, along with printouts of social media posts and a thick folder labeled Kennedy David. "I've been busy," she said without preamble. "Your wife's attorney is claiming emotional abandonment and wants spousal support. He's also hinting that you might have been financially controlling." "Financially controlling?" I gave Saddie access to everything. She had her own credit cards, her own checking account, which she's been using to pay for hotel rooms, Rita interrupted, sliding a bank statement across the table. "Look at these charges." I scanned the highlighted entries. The Riverside Inn appeared 6 times over the past 3 months, always on Thursday evenings. There were also charges for expensive lingerie, jewelry I'd never seen, and restaurant bills that were way too high for lunch meetings. "She was using our joint account to fund her affair," I said. "Gets better. I had a private investigator do some digging on David Kennedy. Turns out this isn't his first workplace romance. He was fired from his previous job for sleeping with his boss's wife." Rita handed me another folder. Inside were photos of David with various women, employment records showing a pattern of job hopping, and a credit report that revealed significant debt. "David Kennedy is a professional seducer," Rita continued. "He targets married women in positions of authority, uses them to advance his career, then moves on when things get complicated. Your wife wasn't his first victim, and she probably won't be his last." The information hit me like a punch to the gut. Saddie hadn't just cheated on me. She'd been played by a con artist who specialized in manipulating lonely wives. "Does Saddie know about his history?" I asked. I doubt it. Men like Kennedy are experts at presenting themselves as whatever their target wants to see. If Saddie was feeling neglected or unappreciated, he would have positioned himself as the attentive lover who truly understood her. "So, what do we do with this information?" Rita smiled, and it wasn't a pleasant expression. "We use it to destroy their credibility. If Saddie wants to claim this was true love that justified breaking up 2 marriages, we show the court that David Kennedy is a serial predator who targeted her specifically because of her position and vulnerability." Over the weekend, I started implementing Rita's strategy. The first step was securing my assets. I moved our joint savings into an account that only I could access, leaving enough in the shared account to cover basic expenses, but not enough for Saddie to fund any more romantic getaways. The second step was gathering allies. I called everyone in our shared social circle and told them my side of the story, complete with photos and bank records. I didn't ask them to choose sides, but I made sure they had all the facts. The third step was more aggressive. Monday morning, I drove to the gym where David worked out. Pete had done some reconnaissance and learned that David was a regular at PowerFit, one of those expensive fitness clubs where people go to see and be seen as much as to exercise. I found him at the bench press, struggling with more weight than he could handle. His form was terrible, and he was clearly showing off for a blonde woman on the nearby treadmill. "Need a spotter?" I asked, stepping up behind him. David's eyes went wide when he saw me, and he nearly dropped the barbell on his chest. "What are you doing here?" "Working out," I said, helping him rack the weight. "Same as you, although I have to say your form is terrible. You're going to hurt yourself lifting like that." "Look, Tom." "It's Mr. Langley," I corrected. "And I'm not here to fight. I'm here to give you some advice." David sat up, glancing around nervously. The gym was busy, and people were starting to notice our conversation. "What kind of advice?" "Career advice. See, I did some research on you, David. Turns out you have a pattern of sleeping with married women at work. Your last 3 jobs ended because you couldn't keep it in your pants." David's face flushed red. "That's not true? I have the employment records. I also have statements from your former colleagues. Apparently, you're quite the topic of conversation in HR circles." I pulled out my phone and showed him a screenshot of a professional networking forum where several people had posted warnings about David's behavior. "The thing is, David, Chicago's financial sector is smaller than you think. Word gets around. And right now, the word is that you're a liability who destroys workplace morale and exposes companies to intimate harassment lawsuits. You can't prove any of that. I don't have to prove it. I just have to make sure the right people know about it." I gestured toward the blonde on the treadmill. "Speaking of which, isn't that Rebecca from Hartwell Investments? I heard they're hiring for a senior analyst position. Think she'd be interested in knowing about your employment history?" David followed my gaze and paled when he realized the woman he'd been showing off for was a potential networking contact. "What do you want?" he asked. "I want you to disappear. Find a job in another city, preferably another state. Stop returning Saddie's calls. Make it clear that whatever you two had is over." "And if I don't?" I smiled and picked up his protein shake from the bench beside him. "Then I make sure every financial firm in Chicago knows exactly what kind of employee you are." I accidentally knocked the shake out of his hand, sending it splashing across the gym floor. "Oops, clumsy me." David stared at the mess, then at me. "You're insane." "I'm motivated. There's a difference." I left him there to clean up his spilled shake and walked over to Rebecca's treadmill. She pulled out her earbuds when she saw me approaching. "Excuse me," I said. "I couldn't help but notice you were talking to David Kennedy over there. I thought you should know that he was just fired from Meridian Financial for having an affair with his supervisor. Might want to be careful about any business relationships with him." Rebecca's eyes widened. "Thank you for the warning. Just looking out for a fellow professional." I left the gym feeling better than I had in weeks. David's reputation in Chicago's financial sector was now effectively destroyed, and word would spread quickly through the professional networks that kept the city's business community connected. But I wasn't done yet. That evening, I drove to Saddie's temporary apartment, a furnished place she was renting month to month while the divorce proceedings played out. I didn't go inside. Instead, I parked across the street and waited. At 8:30, David's BMW pulled into the parking lot. He looked around nervously before getting out of his car and walking to Saddie's building. Apparently, my conversation at the gym hadn't convinced him to end things with my wife. I pulled out my phone and started recording as David knocked on Saddie's door. She answered wearing a silk robe I'd bought her for our anniversary 2 years ago. They kissed in the doorway, and David handed her a bouquet of flowers. I uploaded the video to a private social media account and sent the link to Linda Kennedy along with a message. "Thought you should know they're still seeing each other. Might be useful for your divorce proceedings." Linda responded within minutes. "Thank you. My attorney will be very interested in this." The next morning, I received a call from Rita. David Kennedy's wife filed an alienation of affection lawsuit against Saddie yesterday. Apparently, she has video evidence that they're still carrying on their affair. Alienation of affection? Is that a real thing? In Illinois, yes. It's a civil lawsuit that allows a spouse to sue their partner's lover for damages. If Linda can prove that Saddie intentionally interfered with her marriage, she could be awarded significant monetary damages. How significant? Potentially hundreds of thousands of dollars. It depends on the length of the marriage, the couple's financial situation, and the extent of the emotional damage. I felt a grim satisfaction at the news. Saddie wasn't just losing her marriage and her job, she was facing a lawsuit that could bankrupt her. But the best part was yet to come. Wednesday evening, I got a call from Pete. "You need to see the news," he said. "Channel 7, right now." I turned on the television just in time to catch the tail end of a story about workplace affairs in corporate America. The reporter was standing outside Meridian Financial's building, discussing a recent case where 2 employees had been fired for violating company policy. Sources tell us that the affair began several months ago and was discovered when the woman's husband confronted the couple at a local restaurant. The reporter said, the incident has raised questions about how companies monitor and enforce their relationship policies. They didn't use names, but anyone who knew Saddie and David would recognize the story. The segment ended with a statement from Meridian Financial reaffirming their commitment to maintaining a professional workplace environment. Saddie's humiliation was now a matter of public record. My phone rang almost immediately. It was Saddie, and she was furious. "How could you do this to me?" she screamed. "My parents saw that news story. My sister called asking if it was about me." "I didn't call the news," I said calmly, "but I'm not surprised they picked up the story. Workplace affairs are always good for ratings. This is destroying my reputation." "Your affair destroyed your reputation. The news is just reporting the facts. Tom, please, can we meet somewhere and talk? This has gone too far. We can work this out." "There's nothing to work out, Saddie. You cheated on me, lied to me, and used our money to fund your affair. Now you're facing the consequences." "I made a mistake. You made a choice, multiple choices over several months, and now you get to live with the results." I hung up and immediately called Rita to report the conversation. "She's getting desperate," Rita said. "Desperate people make mistakes. Keep documenting everything, but be careful. If she feels cornered, she might try something stupid." Rita's warning proved prophetic. Thursday morning, I found a note taped to my front door. It was from a private investigator named Frank Morrison, and it was clearly meant to intimidate me. "Mr. Langley," the note read, "your recent actions have caused significant distress to my client. I strongly advise you to cease your harassment campaign immediately, or you may face legal consequences." I took a photo of the note and sent it to Rita, then called Pete. "Saddie hired a PI to threaten me," I told him. "What kind of threat?" "The vague, legally meaningless kind, but it shows she's escalating." "You watch your back," Pete said. "Desperate people do desperate things." He was right to be concerned, but Saddie had made one crucial mistake. She was fighting a defensive war, trying to minimize damage and salvage what she could from the wreckage of her life. I was fighting an offensive war, and I was just getting started. Frank Morrison turned out to be exactly what I expected, a washed-up ex-cop who specialized in intimidating people for clients who couldn't handle their own dirty work. He was waiting by my car when I left for work Friday morning, a thick-set man in his 50s wearing a cheap suit and an expensive attitude. "Mr. Langley," he approached with the kind of swagger that was supposed to make me nervous. "Frank Morrison, Morrison Investigations. I think we need to have a conversation." "About what?" I asked, continuing to walk toward my car. "About the harassment campaign you're running against my client. Saddie Langley has rights, and you're violating them." I stopped and turned to face him. "What rights would those be, exactly?" "The right to privacy, for starters. The right to move on with her life without being stalked and threatened." "Stalked? I haven't been within 50 feet of Saddie since the Café. As for threatened, the only threats I've seen are the note you left on my door yesterday." Morrison stepped closer, trying to use his size to intimidate me. "Look, pal, I know what you're doing. The social media posts, the calls to her friends, the little stunt you pulled at Kennedy's gym. It stops now. Or what? Or things get complicated for you." I pulled out my phone and started recording. "Could you repeat that threat for the camera, Frank?" Morrison's face darkened. "Turn that off." "No, I don't think I will. See, Frank, I know exactly what you are. You're a bottom feeder who makes his living intimidating people for clients who don't want to get their hands dirty. But here's the thing. I'm not intimidated. You should be? Should I? Let's see. You're working for a woman who's unemployed, facing a divorce, and being sued for alienation of affection. That means she's probably not paying you very well, which means you're not going to risk a harassment charge for whatever she's offering." Morrison's jaw tightened. "You're making a mistake. The only mistake I'm making is wasting time talking to you instead of calling the police to report this intimidation attempt." I started to dial 911, and Morrison backed away. "This isn't over." "Yes, it is," I said. "And if I see you near my house, my car, or my workplace again, I'll have you arrested for stalking." Morrison got into a beat-up sedan and drove away, but I knew he'd be back. Men like him didn't give up easily, especially when their reputation was on the line. I called Rita and reported the encounter, then drove to work with a new sense of urgency. Saddie was escalating, which meant I needed to escalate too. That weekend was the annual Maple Grove Neighborhood Block Party, a tradition that brought together all the families on our street for an afternoon of barbecue, games, and gossip. Saddie and I had hosted it 3 years running, but this year I was flying solo. I spent Saturday morning setting up tables and chairs in my backyard, stringing lights between the trees, and preparing enough food for 30 people. The neighbors started arriving around noon, and within an hour, my backyard was full of families enjoying the late summer weather. At 2 o'clock, Saddie arrived. She'd clearly dressed for the occasion. Sundress, perfect makeup, the kind of smile she used to wear at work functions when she was trying to win over difficult clients. She walked into my backyard like she still belonged there, greeting neighbors with hugs and air kisses. "Tom," she called out when she saw me manning the grill, "everything looks wonderful, just like old times." The conversations around us quieted as people sensed the tension. Everyone knew about the divorce by now, but seeing us in the same space for the first time since the cafe made it real. "Saddie," I said without looking up from the hamburgers I was flipping, "I don't remember inviting you. It's a neighborhood party. I've lived here for 15 years. You used to live here, now you live in a furnished apartment on the other side of town." Mrs. Patterson from next door appeared at Saddie's elbow. "Saddie, dear, how are you holding up? This must be so difficult." "I'm managing," Saddie said, shooting me a meaningful look. "It's been challenging, but I'm trying to stay positive. Well, if you need anything, you know where to find me." Mrs. Patterson had always liked Saddie, and I could see the sympathy in her eyes. Saddie was working the crowd, playing the role of the wronged wife, trying to maintain her dignity in the face of an unreasonable husband. I let her work the room for about an hour, watching as she collected sympathetic looks and supportive hugs from neighbors who didn't know the full story. Then I made my move. "Excuse me, everyone," I called out, tapping a beer bottle with a fork to get their attention. "Before we continue with the festivities, I wanted to share something with all of you." The crowd gathered around me, curious about what I was going to say. Saddie's face went pale as she realized what was happening. "Many of you have been asking about Saddie and me, about why we're getting divorced. I thought you deserved to know the truth." "Tom, don't," Saddie warned. "The truth is that Saddie has been having an affair with her coworker for the past several months. I discovered them together at a cafe 3 weeks ago." Gasps and murmurs rippled through the crowd. Mrs. Patterson's hand flew to her chest. Bob from across the street nearly choked on his beer. "I have photos," I continued, pulling out my phone. "Would anyone like to see them?" "Tom, stop this," Saddie pleaded, but her voice was drowned out by the shocked exclamations of our neighbors. I connected my phone to the Bluetooth speaker I'd set up for background music and pulled up the photos from the cafe. The images appeared on the tablet I'd mounted on a nearby table, visible to everyone in the backyard. The reaction was immediate and brutal. Mrs. Patterson stepped away from Saddie like she was contagious. Bob shook his head in disgust. The younger couples exchanged scandalized looks. "Saddie used our joint bank account to pay for hotel rooms," I continued. "She lied about working late while she was actually meeting her boyfriend. She violated her company's relationship policy and got herself fired." "That's enough," Saddie shouted, but the damage was done. The crowd was staring at her with a mixture of shock, disgust, and disappointment. These were people who'd known her for years, who'd attended our barbecues and holiday parties, who'd considered her a friend and neighbor. "I think you should leave," said Janet from 2 houses down. "This is supposed to be a family event." Saddie looked around the backyard, searching for a sympathetic face and finding none. Even Mrs. Patterson, who'd been offering comfort just minutes earlier, was now avoiding eye contact. "You're all going to believe his version without even hearing mine?" Saddie asked. "The photos speak for themselves," Bob said. "Jesus, Saddie, what were you thinking?" Saddie's composure finally cracked. "You don't understand. My marriage was—" "Your marriage was what?" I interrupted. "Difficult, unfulfilling. So you decided to cheat instead of talking to me about it or going to counseling or asking for a divorce. It wasn't supposed to happen like this." "How was it supposed to happen? Were you planning to leave me for David, or were you just going to keep lying and sneaking around indefinitely?" Saddie couldn't answer because there was no good answer. She'd been caught, exposed, and humiliated in front of everyone she'd been trying to impress. "I want you to leave," I said, "and don't come back." Saddie looked around the crowd one more time, hoping for support that wasn't coming, then walked out of my backyard and out of my life. The block party continued, but the mood had shifted. People were talking in hushed tones, processing what they'd just witnessed. Several neighbors approached me privately to offer their support and express their shock at Saddie's behavior. "I had no idea," Mrs. Patterson said. "She always seemed so devoted to you." "People aren't always what they seem," I replied. Sunday morning, I woke up to find my car vandalized. Someone had keyed the paint, slashed 2 tires, and spray-painted "asshole" across the windshield. I called the police and filed a report, though I doubted they'd be able to prove who was responsible. But I had a pretty good idea. I called Pete and asked him to come over with his truck. While we were waiting for the tow truck to arrive, a black Escalade pulled up across the street. Frank Morrison got out, along with a younger man I didn't recognize. "Looks like Saddie's escalating again," Pete observed. "Let her," I said. "I'm ready for whatever she wants to throw at me." The younger man started walking toward us, and I could see he was built like a fighter. Broad shoulders, scarred knuckles, the kind of confidence that came from knowing how to hurt people. "You Tom Langley?" he asked. "Depends who's asking." "Name's Vince. Frank over there says you've been causing problems for a friend of ours." Pete stepped up beside me. 2 against 2. I like those odds better. Vince smiled, but it wasn't a friendly expression. "This doesn't concern you, pal." "Everything that concerns my brother concerns me," Pete said. I held up my phone, which was already recording. "Vince, right? I want you to know that this conversation is being live-streamed to my social media accounts. Say hello to my followers." Vince's confidence wavered slightly when he realized he was being broadcast to potentially hundreds of people. "Turn that off," he said. "No, I don't think I will. See, Vince, you and Frank made a tactical error. You came to my house in broad daylight to intimidate me. That's criminal threatening, which is a felony in Illinois. We're just having a conversation." "Are we? Because it sounded like you were threatening me on behalf of my ex-wife? That makes this part of a harassment campaign, which means the FBI could get involved." That was probably an exaggeration, but Vince didn't know that. He looked back at Frank, who was staying safely by the Escalade, then at the phone that was still recording everything. "This isn't over," Vince said. "Yes, it is," I replied, "because if I see either of you near me again, I'm calling the police and having you arrested, and since this entire conversation is now on the internet, there won't be any question about what happened." Vince and Frank got back in their Escalade and drove away, but not before I got their license plate number on camera. I called Rita and sent her the video. "Saddie's getting desperate," I told her. "Desperate enough to hire muscle," Rita agreed. "This actually works in our favor. Intimidation and harassment will hurt her case if this goes to trial." "What's our next move?" "We go nuclear," Rita said. "It's time to end this." The nuclear option, as Rita explained it, involved exposing every detail of Saddie's affair to everyone who mattered in her life. Her parents, her siblings, her former colleagues, her college friends. Everyone would know exactly what she'd done and how she'd tried to cover it up. "It's scorched earth," Rita warned. "Once we do this, there's no going back. Saddie will never forgive you, and some people might think you're being vindictive." "Good," I said. "I want her to know that actions have consequences." Monday morning, I sent a detailed email to Saddie's parents, explaining the situation and including the photos from the cafe. Her father called me within an hour. "Tom, I don't know what to say," he said. His voice sounded older than I remembered. "We had no idea Saddie was capable of something like this." "Neither did I, Mr. Walsh. I thought you deserved to know the truth. What she did, it's inexcusable. I want you to know that Margaret and I don't support her behavior." That conversation was repeated throughout the week as I contacted Saddie's extended family, her college friends, and her former colleagues. The response was universally supportive of me and condemnatory of Saddie. By Friday, Saddie's social circle had collapsed entirely. The people who'd initially supported her had turned against her as the full scope of her deception became clear. Even Julie, her most loyal friend, had stopped returning her calls. Saddie was now completely isolated, unemployed, facing a divorce and a lawsuit, with her reputation in ruins. But she still had one card to play, and on Friday evening, she played it. The message came through my lawyer Friday evening. Saddie wanted to meet to discuss a mutually beneficial resolution to our divorce. She suggested Riverside Park, the same place where we'd had our first date 16 years ago. Rita was immediately suspicious. "It's a trap," she said over the phone. "She's got nothing left to lose, which makes her dangerous." "What kind of trap?" "I don't know, but people don't ask for meetings in secluded locations unless they're planning something, especially not people who've already tried to intimidate you with hired muscle." But I was tired of being reactive. For weeks, I'd been responding to Saddie's moves, defending myself against her attacks, playing defense in a game where she kept changing the rules. It was time to go on offense. "Set up the meeting," I told Rita, "but I'm going to be ready for whatever she's planning." Rita tried to talk me out of it, but I'd made up my mind. Saturday evening, as storm clouds gathered overhead for what looked like another Midwestern downpour, I drove to Riverside Park. The park was nearly empty due to the threatening weather. A few joggers were trying to beat the rain, and an elderly man was walking his dog near the pond, but otherwise the place was deserted. I found Saddie sitting on a bench near the gazebo where we'd shared our first kiss. She was wearing a simple black dress and looked smaller somehow, diminished by everything that had happened. "Thank you for coming," she said as I approached. "What do you want, Saddie?" "I want to end this. The divorce, the fighting, all of it. We used to love each other, Tom. Can't we find a way to end this with some dignity?" I sat down on the opposite end of the bench, maintaining distance between us. "You should have thought about dignity before you decided to cheat on me." "I know I made mistakes." "Stop calling it mistakes. You had an affair. You lied to me for months. You used our money to fund your relationship with another man. Those weren't mistakes. They were choices." Saddie's composure started to crack. "Fine. They were choices. Bad choices. But what you've done since then? Destroying my reputation, turning our friends against me, humiliating me in front of the entire neighborhood? That's not justice, Tom. That's revenge." "You're right," I said. "It is revenge, and you earned every bit of it. I've lost everything. My job, my friends, my family's respect. Isn't that enough?" "No." The word hung in the air between us like a challenge. Saddie stared at me for a long moment, and I could see the exact instant when her facade of remorse fell away and was replaced by something harder and more desperate. "I was hoping we could do this the easy way," she said. "What's the hard way?" Instead of answering, Saddie pulled out her phone and started recording. "Tom, I need you to stop threatening me and David. I'm scared of what you might do." "What are you talking about?" "You've been stalking us, sending threatening messages, hiring people to intimidate us. I just want to feel safe." I realized what she was doing, creating a false record of me threatening her, trying to manufacture evidence that she could use in court to paint me as an abuser. "Saddie, stop recording. You know none of that is true. Please, Tom, I'm begging you. Just leave us alone." She was speaking loudly enough for her voice to carry, and I noticed that Frank Morrison had appeared near the parking lot, also recording with his phone. They were trying to create a scene that would make me look like the aggressor, but I'd been expecting something like this. I pulled out my own phone and opened the live stream app I'd set up earlier. Within seconds, I was broadcasting live to my social media followers. "Good evening, everyone," I said, speaking directly to the camera. "I'm here at Riverside Park with my ex-wife Saddie, who just tried to create a false record of me threatening her. Saddie, would you like to explain to my followers why you're trying to frame me?" Saddie's eyes went wide when she realized what I was doing. "Turn that off." "No, I don't think I will. See, folks, Saddie here has been trying to play the victim ever since I caught her cheating on me. Now she's trying to manufacture evidence that I've been threatening her." The viewer count on my live stream was climbing rapidly as people shared the link. Within minutes, hundreds of people were watching our confrontation in real time. "You're insane," Saddie said, lunging for my phone. I stood up and backed away, keeping the camera focused on her. Saddie just tried to grab my phone to stop me from exposing her lies. Frank Morrison, the private investigator she hired to intimidate me, is over there by the parking lot, also recording. I turned the camera toward Frank, who immediately tried to hide behind a tree. This is what desperation looks like, folks. When people get caught in their lies, they try to create new lies to cover up the old ones. "Tom, please," Saddie said, and now she was genuinely crying. "Just stop this." "Stop what? Telling the truth?" "You had an affair, Saddie. You lied to me, you stole from me, and now you're trying to frame me as an abuser. Which part of that should I stop talking about?" The storm that had been threatening all evening finally arrived, and rain started falling in heavy drops. Most people would have sought shelter, but I was exactly where I wanted to be. "You know what's funny?" I said, still addressing the camera as rain soaked through my shirt. "The first time I caught Saddie cheating, it was during a rainstorm just like this one. I'd stopped at a cafe to wait out the weather and found her sitting on another man's lap. Saddie was backing away now, probably trying to get out of camera range, but I followed her. She looked just as shocked then as she does now. Same pale face, same desperate expression. The only difference is that now everyone gets to see it. "You're destroying me," Saddie whispered. "No, Saddie. You destroyed yourself. I'm just making sure everyone knows about it." That's when David Kennedy appeared. He came running from the direction of the parking lot, probably having been waiting in his car for Saddie's signal. He was soaked within seconds of leaving his vehicle, his expensive suit clinging to his body as he ran toward us. "Leave her alone," he shouted as he approached. I turned the camera toward him. "And here's David Kennedy, the man my wife was cheating with. David, would you like to tell my viewers about your history of seducing married women?" David stopped short when he realized he was being broadcast live. "Turn that camera off." "David here has been fired from 3 different jobs for having affairs with married colleagues," I continued. "He's a professional homewrecker who targets vulnerable women and uses them to advance his career." That's not true, David protested, but his voice lacked conviction. Isn't it? Should I read the employment records I obtained? Or maybe we could call your ex-wife, Linda, and ask her about the alienation of affection lawsuit she filed against Saddie. David looked at Saddie, probably expecting her to defend him, but she was too busy dealing with her own crisis to worry about his reputation. The rain was coming down harder now, turning the park into a muddy mess. Normal people would have sought shelter, but none of us were behaving normally anymore. You know what I think happened? I said, addressing the camera while keeping both Saddie and David in frame. I think David targeted Saddie specifically because she was in HR and could help his career. I think he seduced her with promises of love and understanding, made her feel special and appreciated. Stop, Saddie said. But David never intended to leave his wife for Saddie. He was just using her, the same way he's used other women, and Saddie was too flattered by the attention to see what was really happening. You don't know what you're talking about, David said, but he was backing away now, probably realizing that his presence was only making things worse. Don't I? Then why don't you tell everyone about your plans for the future? Are you going to marry Saddie, support her through her divorce and lawsuit? Or are you going to disappear as soon as things get too complicated? David's silence was answer enough. That's what I thought, I said. Saddie, you threw away 15 years of marriage for a man who was never going to commit to you. How does that feel? Saddie's composure finally shattered completely. She started screaming at me, calling me names I won't repeat, telling me how much she hated me and how she wished she'd never married me. All of it was being broadcast live to an audience that was now over 1,000 people. David tried to calm her down, but she turned on him too, accusing him of abandoning her when she needed him most. The rain was pouring down, turning their argument into a muddy, desperate spectacle that was being watched by hundreds of strangers. And there you have it, folks, I said to the camera. The true face of adultery. No dignity, no honor, just desperate people making desperate choices and blaming everyone else for the consequences. Police sirens wailed in the distance, probably called by someone who'd seen the live stream and thought there might be violence. I was glad they were coming. It would make the ending even more dramatic. Saddie heard the sirens too and panicked. She started running toward the parking lot, probably hoping to escape before the police arrived. But the rain had made the grass slippery and she fell face first into a puddle of mud. David tried to help her up, but he slipped too, landing beside her in the same puddle. Both of them were now covered in mud, soaked to the skin, looking like the desperate, pathetic people they'd become. The police cars arrived just as I was ending my live stream. 2 officers got out and approached us cautiously, probably trying to figure out what kind of domestic situation they were walking into. Officers, I called out. I'm Tom Langley. I think someone called about a disturbance, but everything's under control now. The senior officer, a woman in her 40s with the kind of no-nonsense attitude that comes from dealing with too many domestic disputes, looked at Saddie and David covered in mud, then at me standing calmly in the rain. What's going on here? She asked. My ex-wife asked to meet me to discuss our divorce. When I arrived, she tried to create a false record of me threatening her. I live-streamed our conversation to protect myself from her false accusations. Is that true? The officer asked Saddie. Saddie tried to explain, but she was crying and covered in mud and not making much sense. David wasn't much help either. He kept looking around like he was planning to run. I have the entire conversation recorded, I told the officer. Both her attempt to frame me and my response. Several hundred people witnessed it live. The officer took our statements and reviewed the recordings. In the end, no charges were filed. Saddie's attempt to create false evidence had backfired spectacularly, and there was no actual crime to prosecute. But the damage was done. The livestream had been shared thousands of times, and clips of Saddie and David falling in the mud were already becoming viral memes. Their humiliation was now permanent, archived forever on the internet for anyone to see. As the police cars drove away and the rain finally started to slow, I stood alone in the park where my marriage had begun 16 years ago. Saddie and David had left separately, probably to nurse their wounds and figure out what was left of their lives. I pulled out my phone and checked the final viewer count on my live stream. Over 5,000 people had watched the confrontation. The comments were overwhelmingly supportive of me and critical of Saddie and David. Justice, I realized, didn't always come from courts or lawyers or legal settlements. Sometimes it came from simply exposing the truth and letting people see who someone really was. I walked back to my car as the storm clouds cleared and the first stars became visible in the darkening sky. Tomorrow, I would finalize my divorce, settle the financial details, and begin rebuilding my life. But tonight, standing in the rain where it all began, I felt something I hadn't felt in months. Peace. The downpour had washed away everything I'd ever needed to lose.